Thank you kindly. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the June 27th Impacts Grant Review Committee meeting. As a reminder, this is a public meeting, and this is being recorded. And with that, we have disabled the chat feature so that we can capture all discussion as part of the recorded meeting. To make this meeting run the most smoothly, we ask that you direct any questions towards myself or the co-chairs. My name is Casey Beck. I'm the Behavioral Health Program Manager at the Criminal Justice Commission. And today, hopefully what you're tuning in for are a few updates regarding the impacts and behavioral health deflection grants. And we'll be discussing the upcoming standard behavioral health deflection application review process. Quite a mouthful. In terms of an anticipated meeting schedule, that's shown here. Please note that all times are purely estimates and that there are no agenda items that require action today. Before we take roll, I wanted to welcome our newest member of the Impacts Grant Review Committee, State Representative Charlie Conrad, who was appointed by the House of Representatives and holds a non-voting position. Representative Conrad, I saw that you were tuned in. Would you please take a moment to introduce yourself?
Yeah, good morning. I appreciate that, Casey. So I'm State Rep Charlie Conrad. I represent House District 12, which is Eastern Lane County. And I sit on the Judiciary and the Behavioral Health Healthcare Committee, as well as the Emergency Management, Vets, and General Government. So all three of those touch this topic area, and I was excited to be part of the process, particularly with being involved in 4002 and getting some of the back end monies going for our shovel ready projects and some of our programs. So appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. And then you may have heard of our two other new members. I know that Paul Solomon was able to join us at the last meeting and was able to give his introduction then, but Carl McPherson, welcome. Carl was also appointed to the Grant Review Committee back in April with the passage of House Bill 4002, really as part of this new behavioral health deflection grant effort. Carl, would you please take a moment to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. Good morning. My name is Carl McPherson. I'm the Executive Director of Metropolitan Public Defender. We're the largest provider in Washington County and Multnomah County, and I've been a public defender for 26 years. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much, Carl. All right. So with our new members introduced, we're going to go ahead and pause now to take roll. Hopefully get that pulled up here. Okay, pardon me. There we go. Let's see. Avery, would you like to call it or would you like me to call it and you mark? Sorry, we didn't arrange that ahead of time.
Whichever is easier for you, Casey. It's good with me.
Why don't you call the roll then? Thank you.
Okay. Sam Byers.
Good morning, present.
Ken Sanchagrin.
Present.
Judge Shanti.
Here.
Liz Weber.
I saw Liz join. It's possible we may have lost her momentarily.
I'm present. I'm having technical issues. Sorry.
No worries. Thanks for saying something, Liz.
Jeremiah Stromberg.
Here.
Steve Gunnels.
I'm here.
Eric Swallow.
Present.
Chief Marsha Harnden.
Good morning, I'm here.
Commissioner Claire Hall.
Present.
Alicia Beamer.
Present, good morning.
Stacy Brubaker. Dr. Brigham. Sheriff Landers.
Good morning, I'm here.
Dr. Stanfield.
Present.
Senator Gelser-Bluen.
Hi, I'm Katie Slobodnik. I am sitting in for Senator Gelser-Bluen.
Okay, thank you. Janie Golickson.
Good morning, I'm here. Thank you.
Perfect. RJ Navarro.
Present.
Michelle Mason,
Present.
Representative Conrad,
Here.
Paul Solomon,
Good morning, I'm here.
and Carl McPherson.
Yes, good morning here.
Perfect. I'll pass it back to you, Casey.
Thank you, Avery. And way to show up, Impacts GRC. That is an impressive attendance roll. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate it. So first and foremost, I have an update for you all on the original Impacts grant, which I guess internally we are kind of referring to it now as the high utilizer impacts, just to keep them separate. So you may hear that terminology moving forward. I'm also open to suggestions. But I had some updates for you all regarding the maintenance funding process and the status of that process. So you may recall back at the beginning of April, we moved forward with a plan to open up a semi straightforward and easy application process open to existing grantees through which they could opt in for additional maintenance fundings that was an approved up to amount, so not to exceed, that was approved by you all on April 2nd. And that process was open to grantees April 12th through May 10th. They had an opportunity to indicate whether or not they were interested in extending their project period for an additional year through June 30th of 2025. They also had an opportunity to request 1 year of additional funding to maintain existing operations only. So that means no new asks, no changes to scope, really just what did these grantees need to get through an additional year of operation, as well as taking into consideration any unspent funds. Unspent funds happen for a variety of reasons. In particular with, the impacts grantees, the 15 grantees, there's often, severe hiring challenges in the behavioral health field, and those vacancies can lead to vacancy savings that are then applied, later throughout the life of the grant. So we asked grantees, and we trusted grantees to do their own evaluation of how much money they had left in the bank, and then to basically subtract that from their estimated budget projection. There was a maximum 1 year maintenance amount available for each site as determined by the GRC in April. And I guess the update for you all is that all grantees requested to extend their project periods for an additional year through that June 30th of 2025. And nearly all grantees requested additional funding. This slide represents an overview of those maintenance requests. And, all the amounts, those particular figures that are presented here are representative of, those maintenance funding requests that we received from grantees with very minor adjustments by the CJC. We're talking dollars and cents to just ensure even quarterly disbursements. So it's possible, for instance, that Clackamas County may have requested $274,993, and then to get that to an even disbursement, we brought it up to 96. The total maintenance funding request from all grantees is reflected at the bottom right corner there, $6,557,928. No request received from a grantee exceeded a grantee's recommended and approved up to amount. Everyone came in at or under, really just taking the consideration of any unspent funds. You'll notice that the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, are not requesting additional funding at this time. They noted they did not need additional funds at this time, but they did appreciate the opportunity to extend their project period for an additional year. Are there any questions about this process in particular or the information represented here before we move on to behavioral health deflection updates?
Casey, could you send this slide deck out to us?
Of course, yeah. So all slide decks will be shared and will also be public record, available for anyone in attendance, in addition to GRC members.
Great, thank you.
All right, I'm not seeing or hearing any other questions. I realize I didn't really go over the exact order of agenda items, but there is time for public comment reserved at the end. I believe we have reserved, I think it's around 10:45-ish, depending on how quickly I get through things. But if you are a member of the public, there is time to comment at the end. Thank you. All right, so moving right along. Some updates on the Oregon Behavioral Health Deflection Grant Program, or what we're calling the BHD program. You may recall that this new BHD program was established by House Bill 4002 in the most recent legislative session, and it lives under the oversight of the Impacts Grant Review Committee. And the whole point is to award grants to Oregon's counties and federally recognized tribal governments to fund deflection programs. What's a deflection program? A deflection program means a collaborative program between law enforcement agencies and behavioral health entities that assists individuals who may have substance use disorder, another behavioral health disorder, or co-occurring disorders to create community-based pathways to treatment, recovery support services, housing, case management, or other services. There was a total of $20,708,200 appropriated to the BHD program by Section 15 of House Bill 5204. And where we last left off with this particular grant review committee were some very important decisions made back on April 2nd. So that total pot of $20.7 million and change was brought to the GRC. And they had a responsibility, as outlined by 4002, to decide upon the total amount of available funding that would be set aside for availability for tribal governments and for evaluation. As shown here in kind of this overview slide, that made available $2,070,819 to Oregon's federally recognized tribal governments. We are in the middle of initiating that consultation process. There will likely be a formal consultation set up in this coming month, July, that will, really allow an opportunity for the, folks at the Criminal Justice Commission, as well as co-chair at OHA, to hear the needs of tribes and figure out what tribes would like to see as part of that application process. So that whole process is still in progress, and I will be coming back to you all with updates, but that is, on the very near horizon here. There was also $150,000 set aside for the purposes of evaluation, and I will note that that is in addition to other funding that was set aside as part of House Bill 5204 direction for specific statewide database collection and evaluation thereof. So it's not just $150,000, that was just the set aside of the $20.7 million. With those decisions made, a share of $18,487,381 was made available to Oregon's 36 counties. Per House Bill 4002, the amount available to each individual county would be based on the county formula share that is employed by Oregon Health Authority's Oversight and Accountability Council. And House Bill 4002 also stated that no county applicant shall receive less than $150,000. This slide presents a total county funding overview. So that 18 million and change broken up here, and there are 23 counties denoted with stars that were identified as early adopters in House Bill 5204. What that means is that, as part of the legislative session being in progress and before the passage of these bills, legislative staff reached out to the counties and just asked anyone and everyone who's interested in potentially setting up a deflection program. 23 of Oregon's 36 counties said, sure, maybe. And those 23 counties were then listed in House Bill 5204. And that brought an early adopter opportunity to get some funding access sooner. You'll also see that there are red stars represented here. So the yellow ones specifically represent 20 counties that applied for and received 50% of their funding as part of the early adopter application. And the red stars represent the 3 counties that were identified as early adopters in House Bill 5204, but ended up not applying for 50% of their funding as part of the early adopter application opportunity. I do see Mandy Robertson's hand. Mandy, we have time reserved for public comment at the end of the meeting. So just wanted to give you a heads up. Okay, so the behavioral health deflection early adopter application. As I mentioned, those 23 counties were listed out in House Bill 5204, and House Bill 5204 also set a very quick deadline of May 31st for the distribution of 50% of all available formula funding to those identified counties should they opt in for that funding. That was a record, and it did happen, and we're very excited to be on the other side of that date. But there was a short form application that was open for just 2 weeks, April 9th through 23rd. Through that application, the CJC solicited some very basic information. This was not intended to be a heavy lift for these early adopter counties. We asked for payment information and a incredibly brief description of their proposed programs. I'll go into a couple more details about this on the next slide. The CJC then, provided grant contracts to all of those early adopter applicants no later than April 30th. We began receiving returned signed contracts mid-May, and then payments were immediately processed for those counties. The 60-day deadline, so between April 1st, when the bill was signed, and May 31st, was met for all counties but one. That remaining county's contract approval process just did not conclude in time for the CJC to make the required payment by that deadline. But that county in particular did receive their contract for signature, well ahead of the deadline. So early adopters who chose not to apply for funds, those red star counties, along with all other counties not identified with a star on that previous funding table, are eligible to apply for funding through the standard BHD application, which is open now. And those early adopter counties who received 50% of their formula funding as part of that early adopter application process are welcome to apply now as well for the remaining 50% of their funding. Okay, so in terms of an overview of these early adopter counties, we as staff did as much as an analysis as possible, but you'll note there were quite a few counties who chose to be determined for their particular applications, and that was expected. With a 2-week turnaround, it is very challenging to get all required partners around a table to discuss thoughtful and meaningful action plans. So we wanted to note that through maybe 3 or 4 sentences of a brief program description, early adopters, told the CJC what they aimed to do, and if they had any plan whatsoever. We tried classifying them into these 4 different models, just so we would have a general grasp of what was being attempted here. There's also a huge grain of salt included as a caveat that we expect counties, as they continue to discuss goals and get partners to the table to create action plans and understand the needs of their communities within their jurisdiction, that these, program descriptions, the goals, the models, et cetera, it's all subject to change. So this, as displayed here, was what it was, as noted in an early adopter application that was back in May. The new standard BHD application is due this coming Monday, July 1st. And we expect some things to change, some things to have grown. Maybe some counties will have added additional models or just, changed course completely. That's okay. Staff will be doing another very similar but kind of deep dive analysis in preparation for this GRC's review of those applications in August. So as seen here on this table, I apologize if it is small on your screen, 20 counties representing 19 programs. It's a lot to fit in on a single slide, but you'll notice that nearly half of all the early adopter applicants identified a LEAD type model as their planned approach. LEAD stands for Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion. What that means is there would basically be a law enforcement officer that would maybe initiate that point of contact to deflect someone from the Criminal Justice Commission. That could be with counties, planning to be pre-arrest, pre-charge, pre-filing completely. That also could be counties anticipating a LEAD model with the possibility of charges being held in abeyance. You'll notice that a few counties took a multi-pronged approach to their program. Those ones may have an X in multiple columns. And that could be because they have existing, maybe a crisis team or an existing stabilization center that they would like to incorporate as part of their deflection program modeling. Or they could be starting something completely new. Those details are, were included in those applications, but they are not denoted here on this slide. And then, as I mentioned previously, almost half of all applicants were still in such early planning stages at the time of application in mid-April. They fell into that to be determined column. Basically, they received 50% of their formula funding for the purpose of a planning grant. All of these counties did. That basically said, hey, here's some funding for the first couple of months to get you through the beginning stages of the planning process. And then should you wish to continue and apply for, the remainder of your funding, we'll be asking for a significant amount more detail, come July 1st. And should you choose to just maintain course and use this, your 50% funding for only planning and not seek the remaining funding, we still will ask you for a complete budget projection sheet at the end of July quarterly reporting, so that we have an idea of where your money's going. So that being said, also I wanted to note Hood River and Wasco, as you see kind of in the middle there, they applied together as a regional consortium. So that is why that they are listed sandwiched together. As part of that early adopter application, we also asked counties to, give us a best guess of their implementation date, at which time they expected their program to become operational. So that's listed here on the table on the left. Most of the early adopter counties plan to be operational in 2024. That mainly coincides with the recriminalization of possession of controlled substances and delivery of controlled substances in September. So that's why there's quite a few counties listed there. Also worth noting that Marion County is not listed here because their LEAD program has been operational since 2018. So they're already operational and didn't have a future date to become operational. Right. And then just getting into some of the nuance of early adopters versus standard BHD applicants. So as I mentioned here on the left track, 23 counties identified by House Bill 5204 eligible to access 50% of their formula funding as early as a planning grant It was a super short form application. Their project period started April 1st and will go through June 30th of 2025. And they received that first chunk of money by June. Of those 23 identified early adopters, 20 counties applied and received funding for the total of 19 programs because of that Hood River and Wasco consortium dynamic. On the other track to the right, you've got the standard behavioral health deflection track that's open to 36 counties and Oregon's 9 federally recognized tribal governments. As I mentioned, there is that set aside for tribal funding, and we are, initiating tribal consultation. So the standard BHD application that I'm going to be discussing for the rest of this meeting is really that first one open to counties. And so the tribal process is to be determined and will be open at a later date. For the standard BHD track, you have the option to choose a planning grant or an operational grant. And that really depends, we'll go into more of this nuance later, but really depends on when does your county anticipate becoming operational. If it's before January of 2025, that's going to be an operational grant from the outset. If it's, beyond January of 2025, that's a planning grant. This is all said with, the expectation that planning grants will become operational someday, and that counties will be notifying the CJC of when that time comes. This is definitely more reflective of a standard request for grant proposals process that the CJC is accustomed to administering. So that's a longer application period, lengthier application, much more info solicited from grantee applicants. The project period here begins July 1st, 2024 through June 30th of 2025. As a GRC member, you may be wondering if we're not making decisions until August 1st, how does that work? Basically, we allow programs to backdate their expenses to July 1st. Should you have been an early adopter and now you're seeking the remaining of your funding through this standard process, your project period remains an early adopter project period, April 1st of this year through June 30th of next year. And then we are, with this timeline working as fast as possibly can with the goal that all of the grantees will receive money by October of this year. Paul, I see your hands raised. How can I help?
Question. So with the standard BHD and a shorter project period, will those applicants still get the full allocation even though they're on a shorter timeline than the other counties in the early adopter? And secondly, for counties that don't wind up applying or tribal governments, are you anticipating a supplemental round, or how are we thinking about any excess dollars that aren't spent for both tribal governments and counties?
Okay. So to answer your first question, the allocations, like the disbursements, yes, everything is going to be out the door no later, than June 30th of next year. So the first group, the early adopter group, has received a disbursement. They'll receive another disbursement of the remaining funding. The remainder of the group who are just applying through the standard application for the first time will have set, disbursements of that funding, but all funding will be out the door. And really that's in preparation for whatever comes this next legislative session, to really get an idea of where expenditures are at among grantees as reported, what grantees are saying that they need, etc. To answer your second question, so we are not yet sure of how much funding is not going to be, asked for. So we won't know until July 1st what the ask is. And we really won't know until the GRC makes their approval decisions on August 1st of what funding remains available. The decision of what that funding, goes to post August 1st is up to the GRC. Internally, we're looking at making sure that we're following all organ administrative rules. It may be a thing that this has to go through another round of formula funding because BHD funding, as identified, is formula funding. So do we just crank the calculations one more time and get it to the folks who are, interested? And then in terms of eligibility, if you, were not an early adopter and you also did not apply through the standard application, I guess I am not sure if counties who did not apply would still be eligible for any funding, merely because that's an incredibly short project period at that point. So I think my grant staff hat that I wear would probably say that would not be recommended. And then for the tribal portion, the set aside of, I think it's 2,070,000 and change. I apologize, I don't know the exact number right here, but we are in the process of initiating consultation. And as part of that consultation, the CJC is interested in learning, do tribes want to develop some sort of formula for all 9 tribes? Is it going to be a competitive process that maybe all tribes are welcome to apply for that funding? What do tribal governments in Oregon see as needs as relates to the Deflection programs? What do they want to fund? All of those questions are going to be out there, and we are going to want to hear from tribes what their needs and desires are. And then we will work with tribes to develop a tribal specific application. It could be a request for grant proposals. It could be a short form, easy opt-in. But that whole process is still to be determined through consultation. Does that answer your question, Paul?
Yeah, thank you.
All right. I also wanted to visually orient everyone once again to kind of there's so much nuance here. So I really appreciate your questions and also your patience as I try to explain all of this. But the early adopters versus the standard timeline. So the early adopter timeline is represented in yellow. It's in the top left area of this slide. That one is done. Thank goodness. It was stressful. We are now in this bottom blue timeline for the standard BHD applications. You'll see it's quite a bit more stretched out. That's due to the sheer information needed from grantees as part of a full request for grant proposals process. That's due to CJC policy of having a protest period. That's due to much more needed time for staff review, GRC member review, a meeting to make those award decisions, and then about the same time for a contracting period. But you'll see the goal of getting money out by the end of September, beginning of October. Excuse me. And then noted there in green is today. So we're nearing the very end of this RFGP application period for the standard BHD grant. The due date is this coming Monday, July 1st. And then, we'll be getting into staff review, which, I'll be explaining the process of that in later slides. But really, just 2 weeks of super in-depth review, checking for unallowables, asking any clarifying questions. Maybe there's an incomplete portion of the application that we need to be filled. A lot of grantee outreach and individual work with those applicants to make sure that we have the full and complete picture. Then we hand those applications off to GRC members for their review. and we all reconvene in person on August 1st to go through those applications, have you all discuss, deliberate, and make those award decisions. I know that this particular review section seems tight, especially with precedent set by impacts that we really like to have a lot of squishy time to review applications. But I will note that formula grants function differently than competitive grants. This is a general question of, does this applicant meet eligibility requirements and the overall, purposes of the grant, spirit of deflection as identified in the bill, et cetera? Yes or no. If it's yes, they get to access their funding. If it's no, we figure out a feedback loop of some sorts to get the information required to get that applicant to that approval stage, or further discussion. But it's not a competitive grant, so you are not going to be comparing program to program and needing to make significant cuts. Every grantee, or excuse me, every applicant has that up to amount as identified in their formula table, and you're going to be reviewing their program description and maybe their budget line items to just get a sense of what are they doing with this money and does that meet the spirit. Dr. Stanfill.
Thank you. Thanks, Casey. On this slide, when do you anticipate, if you anticipate consultation with the tribes in July, when do you anticipate their application will be due?
Yeah, up to the tribes. So really it just depends on, are they wanting to go through a competitive process, or are they wanting to go through a formula process? With those unknowns, I'm not sure exactly of what application timeline would suit the tribes best at this point. I would say a standard process for CJC, if it's a full request for grant proposals, would be about 45 days, just so that applicants have ample time to get folks together. That's how we've operated with other grants. But in terms of a short form application, if it's going to be, some sort of formula that the tribes want to apply, or an even split, like kind of an opt-in process of, hey, here's how much money is available to you and opt in. I think the quickest turnaround we've ever had is 2 weeks to get applications in. I hope that answers your question, but I guess it's a big shrug for me. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Thank you. I can guarantee you they won't want to do a competition, but we'll let them tell you. And we're doing this in July, you say?
Yeah, so we have drafted a Dear Tribal Leader letter. It's currently with Oregon Health Authority's Tribal Affairs Department, with for a thorough review, for feedback. Our original proposed date is July 30th for a 2-hour virtual Big C, formal consultation, with the opportunity for tribes, of course, to reach out for additional one-on-one consultation, or to provide written, phone, email feedback as long as that process goes. However, we wanted to confirm with OHA's Tribal Affairs Department that date works for them and also for tribes. It was just kind of a date that the co-chairs of this grant review committee could attend. We have a couple backup dates in mind if it doesn't work out, that are also in July, but that is the goal, and that's the update.
That date looks good so far. So, okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. All right. Are there any other questions from GRC members about this particular timeline and or my amazing word paint skills? Feel free to reach out, but if not, I will move along to technical assistance. Okay. So we have kind of 2 prongs of technical assistance, as part of the Oregon Behavioral Health Deflection Grant Program. The first noted here is implementation technical assistance. The CJC is contracting with OHSU and the fine folks at the Oregon Rural Practice-Based Research Network to assist counties with the creation and implementation of their deflection programs. Dr. Daniel Hoover is the lead PI of those efforts. They have, a really robust offering of one-on-one TA with grantees virtually, and then they're also connecting folks to national deflection experts from the Center for Health and Justice. They've got 3 regional workshops scheduled in July for early adopters, as well as standard behavioral health deflection applicants. The point of those regional workshops is really kind of like an all-day in-person training through which, maybe 5 to 7 of the deflection program partners identified in your application to come all together in person and create a deflection solutions action plan that will aid them in standing up their deflection programs. The folks at CHJ, this is what they do. It's a nationally recognized tool for getting deflection programs off the ground. And the 3 regional workshops are going to be the first July 9th in Baker City, July 22nd in Portland, July 24th in Bend. And early adopters and any active applicants that were part of that BHD were sent basically invitations to attend these regional workshops. These were also sent to any counties that maybe had not indicated interest or started an application quite yet, but maybe with the intent of attending a morning session to just learn about deflection and gain some insight. But those are happening in July, and those efforts are being led by Dr. Hoover in coordination with the folks at CHJ. I saw a hand, I think it said Stacy Brubaker, but it's now disappeared from my screen, so I apologize. Stacy, was that you?
Yeah, it was me, and it says it's here on mine. I don't have my camera on because I tend to lose you all when I turn my camera on.
No worries.
I was just curious about 2 questions I had about the technical assistance meetings. I have heard that there are other meetings that will be happening across the state for various law enforcement, DEA, those kind of folks, not necessarily on the behavioral health side, but on the legal side, that conflict with the dates of the TA. And so I think that there might be challenges for getting the numbers of folks that we want there, at least for the Bend one is the one that I have heard about. So just wanted to throw that out there, that I don't know if there's been looking at any of that to be able to really figure out any conflicts that might exist for those standard players, because I think there's some statewide conferences happening at those same times that really might impact any attendance from those, the DA, the Sheriff's Association, I just have heard that there's a lot of conflicts with the dates that have been picked for July.
Right.
So,
yes. Thank you for
throw that.
Yeah. Thank you for that comment. So the specific one that Stacy's mentioning is the July 24th date for the regional workshop planned in Bend, Oregon. It has a big conflict with the ODAA conference that's being held in Seaside. And if you're familiar with Oregon geography, Seaside and Bend are not very close to each other. So that has been an identified conflict. It was brought up by some of the grantees that were invited to that regional workshop. Unfortunately, these dates, these workshops are baked, and they were not really selected, by Dr. Hoover or the CJC, but purely based on the availability of these national deflection experts. All folks who were invited to these workshops were invited to select whichever workshop, best fit their needs. So just because but I mean, I'm going to use Deschutes County because it's Bend. But for instance, if Deschutes County was unable to make the regional workshop in Bend, they were welcome to attend the one in Portland. They were welcome to attend the one in Baker City. Travel and accommodations are an eligible expense of the BHD grant. So we tried our best to offer some accommodations there, knowing that conflict exists. It is deeply unfortunate. We were all, I guess, kind of very disheartened to learn about the conflict. But, should any of the applicants, grantees, et cetera, interested parties be interested in changing their conflict, excuse me, their workshop of choice, they are directed to reach out to Kirsten Austin, excuse me, who is on Dr. Hoover's team, who has sent out communications to work with these grantees and applicants one-on-one to try to address these conflicts and understand the needs of those folks.
Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure we were all aware of that. And I was not aware that you could switch your group. So that might be helpful. Although none of those locations are especially helpful for any of us on the south side of the state. But
the other prong of technical assistance actually has to do with data collection and TA. So while the CJC has access, of course, to our traditional criminal justice, statewide administrative data as required for tracking, new data systems must be created to track deflection-specific information, especially from the program coordinators. So the CJC has partnered with the Waddell Research Group at the Oregon Health and Science University, Portland State University School of Public Health to implement deflection data collection across the entire state via a web-based database. And then data-specific technical assistance will also be provided to all grantees. These may look like very familiar faces. These efforts actually build on the pre-existing partnership with the Waddell Research Group led by Dr. Waddell and with assistance from Sarah Rayner. Their team has actually grown, but you may be recognizing these faces as part of the folks who created the REDCap database for impacts specific data collection. As part of that process, there was an immense amount of grantee, qualitative readiness interviews and continued check-ins throughout the build of that database of, what fits your needs, what are you hoping to collect, and, how best can we support you in training for data collection, et cetera. And all of that is, going to be transferring and applying to the BHD database as well. So included in this partnership with Dr. Waddell is gathering information on local data collection needs and barriers, provision of technical assistance and recommendations for data system implementation at the local level for each jurisdiction, creation of a data collection system, within that REDCap framework, but it's going to be that web-based database so that we can collect statewide data and do program evaluation, and then any associated training for folks on that actual data entry, data collection best practices for local jurisdictions. This group very well understands that your program coordinator or whoever's entering the data may not be a data person. They are ready to come meet you where you're at and offer any specific training or technical assistance to make sure that your county is meeting the requirements of CJC data tracking and reporting. Let's see, I guess the other update I had was that they are going to be scheduling some of those interviews post workshops. So they're coordinating with Dr. Hoover's implementation technical assistance team to make sure that they're not overwhelming grantees with burden. And some of those interviews to inform the creation of this database will be happening, late summer the creation of the database, hopefully with some piloting, et cetera, will be opening up to coincide with early fall. And yeah, okay. Representative Conrad, I saw your hand.
Thank you. I appreciate it. The technical side, I'm still trying to understand because there's a lot of different databases, a lot of different information that's going to have to go into that. What's the role of OJD in all of that on the court side, and particularly with gathering the data for those lead partners that are going to be looking at that?
Yeah, so great question. So first, what you said at the end there is a great note for everyone. You know, if your program is specifically built around a stabilization center and a stabilization center only, it's likely that you're not going to have, you know, the law enforcement requirements and particular data tracking and reporting that a lead type program might have. The CJC, we are actively working with partners at the Oregon Judicial Department. There was a letter mentioned, or excuse me, sorry, there was a form mentioned in the governor's signing letter that, basically regarded some sort of form of completion for the courts to receive from program coordinators should there be a touch with the criminal justice system. My long answer here is basically getting at, we are not quite sure yet, without having the program descriptions from applicants, of what exactly these programs are seeking to do. And we know that they could have changed from April. So our process is looking like, beginning July 2nd, the day after those applications come in, some staff analysis to identify and flag, any program that might have some sort of touch with the criminal justice system or, law enforcement, what the individual descriptions and definitions of success look like for each individual jurisdiction, and then working with OJD to identify, is there a need for a form? And if so, what does that form look like? And, how can we keep the courts aware? What do the courts need, et cetera? So there's a lot of collaboration from the outset, but also a lot of unknowns remain until those program descriptions come in. So it's a big work in progress, but we have, regular meetings set up to discuss this stuff.
Great. Thank you very much.
All right. So find members of the Impacts GRC. We're going to go over roles and responsibilities as it relates to this review process and grants as a whole. So the Grant Review Committee's role, that includes all responsibilities as established by Senate Bill 973 back at the inception of this committee in 2019. You all are the decision-making body for the Impacts Grant Program and the BHD Grant Program. There are a few key new additional BHD specific responsibilities that I highlighted for you all at the April 2nd meeting. You've already ticked off a couple of those. So noted here, application process, we're in the middle of that. It's almost done. You determine the proportion of funds available to an applicant that's a federally recognized tribal government back in April. That's done. You approved the formula funding table back in April. That's done. Next up, the last two checkboxes, reviewing applications and making award decisions. That's scheduled for August 1st. And then monitoring the progress of and evaluating program outcomes for applicants receiving BHD program funds. Just like the Impacts Grant, that's an ongoing process. So if you're a member of this GRC, we will have, continued meetings to update you via quarterly reporting received from the grantees, via the information that the OHSU team is getting as part of that statewide data collection, feedback from the courts, feedback from the state. Gosh, I can only anticipate, how much more we're going to have to talk about in this upcoming legislative session as we're learning what the legislators are, looking into, what the governor desires, et cetera. So I'm not sure if we're ever going to tick that box off. And I'm sorry, because I personally love a checklist that's all checked. But that is your current role with, the BHD grant. Alicia Beamer, how can I help you?
Hey, Casey, thank you. I'm just wondering, and probably maybe some of the folks that were on the original when we went in, I think it was 2020 when we went through the first round, we had identified some like areas that we as a team were not, we were not going to authorize funds for example, vehicles or law enforcement or things like that, that we were kind of watching as we went through that and didn't authorize funds for. I wonder, but I don't know if we memorialize that really well, or if, just as we're consistent throughout those review processes, if you anticipate that coming up with this review, and then how we can memorialize that and remain consistent throughout and over time.
Yeah, great question. Thank you. So it is worth noting that although the GRC's role with all responsibilities established by, Senate Bill 973 remain intact for BHD, as part of House Bill 4002, there were quite a few caveats of which rules no longer apply to the BHD grant specifically. Of note, I guess a good way I can frame this for folks tuned in today, the impacts grant targets a population of high utilizers. The BHD grant does not. So there are different criteria and therefore likely different eligible expenses. Historically, this grant review committee, over time has approved things such as vehicles, and then, other things related to law enforcement, some yes, some no. There are different expected eligible expenses for the BHD grant. I think that we can work together as GRC and CJC staff to memorialize any decisions that are made in August and, make sure that the GRC remains consistent throughout the life of this grant, the BHD specific grant. But it is a great note that you've brought up to make sure that GRC members are aware that just because something was allowed or prohibited as part of the impacts grant doesn't necessarily mean that it's allowed or prohibited as part of the BHD grant. They're a great Venn diagram. They've got a lot of things in common. I think that these two grants are going to go a long way in supporting and aiding, very vulnerable Oregonians. But they do two separate things. And so I think, I'm definitely happy to take that job on as staff to make sure that for each decision-making, matter that comes before you all, that you're well aware of the guardrails that exist for that particular grant as memorialized in the past or as actions taken in the past or discussed, live and then set on by you all so that we can think about those in the future. Does that satisfy you, Alicia?
Yeah, that sounds great. And I don't know if Judge Shante or any of the others had that same concern, but thank you for addressing that.
A quick note on conflicts, just so everyone's on the same page as we go into that August 1st meeting. Grant review committee members are public officials, and public officials have ethical responsibilities because they influence the operations of state government. So there are actual conflicts and potential conflicts, and those occur when a public official or a GRC member, as I noted, participates in action which would or could result in financial benefit or loss to the official or the official's relatives or business. So that being said, committee members who would or could potentially benefit from an award made to an application or, loss to an application need to disclose that relationship to staff and will not participate in deliberations on an application or vote to approve or not approve for an award for that particular application. If if there's something in your jurisdiction that exists in your world and you have questions about, if it does or doesn't present an actual or potential conflict, we've got a month to work that out. Also know that if you're just in the gray or, sitting on the line and you're not quite sure, August 1st comes around, we're all in person, you're welcome to abstain. You may say that you're not sure if there's a conflict, but that you'd be abstaining from deliberation, abstaining from votes. This is kind of a complex thing. I would say in the world of, grant review committees, and and also in the commission, I know Paul as chair was there yesterday. This stuff comes up a lot and conflicts can be gray. So we're going to navigate that together. But does anyone have any questions at this time? Cool. I know, getting to less than an hour. Thank you for tuning in. I'm so sorry that we don't have time for a break today. We're just going to keep on rolling. Next up is going to be me walking you through the application review criteria and kind of like the process overview of this stuff. So in terms of applicant eligibility for the Behavioral Health Deflection Grant Program, must be one of Oregon's 36 counties or 9 federally recognized tribal governments. As we discussed earlier, tribes are going through a separate process right now for their set aside of funds. So just note that. But the next point of eligibility here, a program must be coordinated by or in consultation with a community mental health program, a CMHP, a local mental health authority, or a federally recognized tribal government. Program also must coordinate the development and administration of that program with all partners outlined in House Bill 4002. There's a whole section 76, that outlines all the requirements of BHD, program and such. So the CJC has worked very hard to incorporate all of those into the solicitation and application. But to summarize those here, those partners are a district attorney, a law enforcement agency, a community mental health program, and a provider from a behavioral health resource network, also called a BURN. Those ones are the ones that are absolutely required in order to be eligible for this funding. Partners, of course, can also include first responder agencies other than law enforcement agencies, community-based providers, treatment providers, community-based organizations, case management providers, recovery support services providers, local mental health authority, tribal government, peer support organization, court, local government body, or any other individual or entity deemed necessary by that program to carry out the purposes of the deflection program, including individuals with lived experience, with a substance use disorder, behavioral health disorder, co-occurring disorders, etc. So these program partners can really be, quite a spectrum of individuals and entities, but the required ones are here. Also, in terms of applicant eligibility, each program must have a program coordinator. That is critical to a BHD program. That person is going to be responsible for convening those deflection program partners as needed for the operation of the program. They are managing and tracking awarded grant funds, and they are tracking and reporting data to that web-based data application that the OHSU Waddell Research Group is in the process of building, but as required by the CJC. An applicant also may be a multi-jurisdictional application on behalf of a consortium of government partners. However, it's worth noting only one application is allowed per county or tribe submitted by the county or tribe or designee thereof. For instance, in that Hood River, Wasco scenario, Wasco County identified Hood River as the designee for those funds. And then Hood River completed, the majority of application for that early adopter. And so there was, a partnership among folks. One partner had to acknowledge that they are designating the other as that kind of consortium lead. And then that consortium lead kind of completes the application for both entities. So that's how those consortia would work. In terms of eligible expenses, grant funds may be used for deflection program expenses, which is hopefully no surprise. And those include, but of course are not limited to, personnel such as law enforcement employees, deputy district attorneys, behavioral health treatment workers such as peer navigators, mobile crisis team members, and support service workers. Funds can be used for behavioral health workforce development. Funds can be used for capital construction, behavioral health treatment infrastructure. Funds can be used as a planning grant, to just take the time needed and to get the right folks at the table to maybe consult, train, etc. In terms of the solicitation components, that was shared out on May 20th to all interested parties. And I then hosted a webinar on May 29th to walk anyone interested through this entire stuff. So apologies if you're hearing this for a second time, but there are kind of 4 components here. You've got the solicitation itself, which goes into the nitty-gritty details of the purpose, eligible applicants, a few of the allowable and prohibited expenses, kind of like next steps in terms of review decisions, the application due date, July 1st, 1:00 p.m. Then there were the behavioral health deflection application questions included. We'll get into the details of those in the next couple of slides. A sample budget sheet and a sample grant agreement, just so that everyone was aware of what they were getting into with this application, and that applicants could invite all the necessary parties to take part in applying. Again, that applications are due no later than July 1st, which is this coming Monday, 1:00 p.m. In terms of the requirements of the application, we're looking for all of that eligibility criteria being met, descriptions of the following, and these come right from House Bill 4002. So what's the coordination of your program with your program partners been like to date? Who's eligible for a deflection program? What constitutes a successful outcome for your community? How is your program culturally and linguistically responsive, trauma-informed, and evidence-based? What's your plan to address language barriers for program referrals and procedures? How will the program coordinator continue to communicate with program partners? What's your action plan there? So this is all included as part of folks' deflection program descriptions. We've done it in a hopefully short, concise, really clear narrative portions to answer these so that we can understand the gist of what people are doing. I will note, and we'll get into this in the next couple slides too, that this is part of the reason why it's so critical for that CJC staff review to happen at the front end, though, because sometimes we get incomplete answers or something doesn't exactly make sense in response to the question that was asked. That's our opportunity as staff to reach out to those applicants and to ask them to clarify or elaborate or make any necessary changes. We also will be asking all applicants to acknowledge the data reporting requirements and upload a budget projection sheet. So another look at those components. There are 4 main components to an application. The cover sheet, through which an applicant would identify information regarding the primary applicant contact, the fiscal contact, their preferred method of payment, which county or counties would be, applying, if you're designating someone to apply because you're joining as a consortium, all that happens in the cover sheet. Applicant eligibility section includes questions regarding that deflection program coordinator, who they are, what entity that they work for, the acknowledgement of their responsibilities. And then the next section, required program partners and collaboration. We ask folks to identify, partner by partner, who that entity is, and then describe the collaboration that has happened to date and plans for future collaboration. And then section C, the deflection program details. That's where we get all those questions outlined in House Bill 4002 answered, as well as other questions that will help the CJC begin our preliminary analysis to identify what models or what types of programs these folks will be falling into. Up next, the data acknowledgements section really just includes several acknowledgements of the requirements to track and report data as requested by the CJC, as well as an acknowledgement of cooperation with the contracted technical assistance providers. And then last but not least, the budget projection section, which is where the applicant will upload their workbook for their projected budget. So the things that are in blue here, those will take up the majority of the CJC grant staff review. We're reviewing all components of the application in great detail. We've got a whole team to do so. And rest assured, we will flag any parts that do not meet requirements. We are also going to work in those first 2 weeks to reach out to applicants with any questions or concerns or requested additional information. Then where we are hoping to lean on the expertise of this grant review committee specifically is in that applicant eligibility section, the deflection program details. It's the heftiest part. The reason I'm kind of walking you through, what the CJC staff is focusing on versus what the GRC's expertise is really needed for is because these are going to be a lot of applications. And we as staff think that it's important for you all to review each and every one, but you don't need to review the application in its entirety of, 10 to 20 pages. Your focus really should be on their program. You don't need to know, what their primary applicant contact is or their fiscal contact, the financial information, whether or not they checked every box. You can rely on us as staff to make sure that that eligibility check has been done. And if there's anything that's noteworthy or received a flag, we will bring that to your attention on August 1st. But we want to be respectful of your time and the very short time period of review ahead of that August 1st in-person meeting. So just know if you need a focus, this is where it should be, that deflection program details section. I'm now going to walk us through a couple of screenshots just so you guys get a kind of a sense of what this looks like, using my favorite county, Cava County, which is my dog. So that's what's here. But as you can see, cover sheet, primary applicant contact, fiscal contact, how would you like payment? Simple, straightforward, and the CJC will review this, very thoroughly and reach out with any questions. As a GRC member, feel free to skip if you do not have time. Applicant eligibility section starts with section A, the deflection program coordinator. So here, we're asking to identify name, position title, org, etc., and how it might be funded. Again, we are happy to take this on, and feel free to skip should your focus be, required to be pared down due to time constraints. In terms of applicant eligibility, section B, required program partners and collaboration. It might be worth taking a skim of this so that you understand who are the partners involved with each application. Maybe you're interested in knowing, which folks are showing up. But again, in terms of eligibility requirements, you know, if for some reason there's one missing, or if it doesn't make sense, or, you know, when you receive it, it's, you know, something flag, CJC staff are also reviewing this very thoroughly. We will flag any concerns. We also will be reaching out to those applicants ahead of the time that you'll be receiving these applications. So hopefully what you're receiving is the very finished and polished product. It is worth noting though, and I know that this example is so small, so I apologize, but a community mental health program, the CMHP, which is a required partner, and the burn provider, for some jurisdictions, that might be the same provider. So just note that depending on the community, some of those, you may see some overlap, and that's expected. Okay, application preview, deflection program details. Kava County specifically, you know, she's a dog. She did her best, but her 75 words or to 150 words with those word limits, all she wrote was a very clear and concise explanation, those words exactly. So note that while this looks like 5 pages, it could be more. And this is where we want GRC members to really focus your time and attention, you know, for these specific applications. This is where all the, you know, the meat and potatoes, if you will be of these applications. Then we've got data acknowledgements. Again, these are acknowledgements. They're check boxes, yeses and nos, making sure that the applicant acknowledges their requirements and their participation. Feel free to skip. And then this is a screenshot of the budget projection sheet that is going to be uploaded as part of each application. And again, I apologize, I know this is so small on your screen, but the gist here is to give you an idea of what this looks like. Sorry, I ran out of breath. Of what this looks like. And it's a CJC standard budget projection sheet. Grant staff will be reviewing these in detail. We'll be reaching out to applicants with any questions. We're gonna, you know, look at allowable prohibited expenses. Maybe we need to work with an applicant of like, oh, okay, you put this in equipment, but we think it fits better in supplies, etc. All of that stuff, grant staff are going to be taken care of. You know, your objective as a GRC member would be to review these sheets to verify that the expenses that they're budgeting for align with the program that they're proposing in that section C, the deflection program details, as well as align with the overall purposes of deflection as outlined in House Bill 4002 and as outlined in the solicitation. House Bill 4002 has uniquely left a lot of these decisions up to counties to decide. So there aren't, you know, as many guardrails that are established quite yet, kind of like as Alicia Beamer mentioned earlier, there aren't as many guardrails set for program expenses or types, etc. at this point. You know, my understanding of that is to just allow counties to be creative and to stand up deflection programs that suit their needs while we look into best practices and begin to collect data and then publish a best practices report, you know, next year. And then it will be up to the legislature to decide if they want to, you know, home in on some of those focus areas, those models, etc., or raise those guardrails in terms of what the focus should be on. So another note too, again, these are not competitive grants. These are formula grants. So part of the CJC staff review is going to be double checking to make sure that the total budget request does not exceed the formula that each jurisdiction was given. So we will be taking care of that. You do not need to whip out your calculator to do math. You can trust us to take care of that. But yeah, and a little bit more on these budget categories, personnel. So in that section, we're looking for salaries, wages, fringe costs, all grant funded personnel that are employed by the grant recipient. So anyone that's working on deflection program as employed by the grant recipient. Contractual services is where you would find, each contract that the grantee would be employing to provide a service or some sort of programmatic aspect of work. And that's where capital construction may be requested. Housing and facilities are eligible expenses for space or utilities as necessary to complete program work, as well as short or long-term housing supports for participants. Capital construction could also live here. For equipment, permanent, non-expendable, we're looking at purchase price of $5,000 or more, or a usable life, apologies, I see a typo there, of 2 or more years for a single item. So laptops, vehicles, etc., like the big pieces of equipment. Supplies is where you would note consumable materials, including cost of small items of equipment that don't meet that threshold for the equipment category. And client supports could be requested as part of that category. And then we've got training and associated travel. Those are eligible expenses for transportation, lodging, per diem, maybe registrations for training to support grant purposes. This is where you might see some grantees include maybe travel and accommodations to attend those workshops or other trainings that they've identified down the line that might support their specific purposes. And then administrative costs, activities associated with administering the grant, purchasing, budgeting, payroll, accounting, all that jazz. Costs may not exceed 10% of total funds requested unless an exception is granted by the commission. This does not and will not apply to tribes when that time comes, but note for counties, we will likely all be seeing 10% or less as part of admin costs. So considerations in your application review. I encourage you to really ground your review in the grant purposes that are outlined in the solicitation and the bill. You also are welcome to refer to the CJC Grant Administration Guide for eligibility and allowable prohibited expenses as it relates to CJC grants as a whole. But no, just as we discussed earlier, some, existing guardrails, prohibited, allowable, may not apply to BHD specifically. We can, I guess, walk through that as we get to it on August 1st. Also for your consideration again, this is not a competitive grant. This is a formula grant. Everyone has basically an amount that they are looking to access as assigned to them by that Oversight and Accountability Council's formula. It's our job to basically say, did they meet the eligibility requirements? It's your job to review, does this meet what we think the bill outlines and what's in the solicitation, knowing that House Bill 4002 is incredibly generous and is looking for creativity. So that will be up to you all, but this is not a competitive grant where we're going to be comparing application to application and, weighing them to make cuts. There's also a notable difference between a planning and operational phase, as I'm sure you all can expect. And then a note that counties may start very small, and that might even be ideal to see, a small operation of sorts that could be scalable in the future with further or additional funding. I would say at the May 9th symposium, one of the main topics was for counties, encouraged to start small so that they could start seeing some success and continue receiving buy-in to then scale up their programs. So if you, as a reviewer, are thinking really big and then surprised at, maybe the the small amount of planning or operation that you're seeing from a particular applicant, know that that might change in the future, and that maybe as a good starting point for getting a deflection program off the ground, starting small could be an acceptable way to start. In terms of process, we are expecting at least 20 applications. As of this morning, I checked and there were 24 total counties that had started an application. I will note that just because they started an application doesn't mean that they'll submit an application by July 1st. And I'll also note that these counties are so busy right now, and they have multiple grants that they're applying for. We're at the end of a biennium. It's a new financial year. Like, there's just so much going on right now, and it's very possible too that we will have some ambitious grantees and applicants submit applications at the final hour. So just know that I'm expecting at least 20 applications. That number could be significantly greater, or it could be right around there. They will be available for GRC members to review no later than July 15th. Myself, my team, we're going to be, working as hard as possible to get through all of those checks and analyses as we're working with applicants to resolve any flags or concerns. So just know that we're going to be trying our hardest to get these to you as soon as possible. We hope that it will be before that July 15th, but it will absolutely be no later, not July 15th date. You will be accessing these via a Google Drive link. I'm also planning on, putting in some resources there for you, such as the solicitation itself, and maybe the list of all the application questions, House Bill 4002 as a reference, our grant administration guide, etc. So note that I'll have an email with all of those things detailed for you to find. And if there are any specific concerns or questions about your access to those, you'll be reaching out to me or Avery, and we are happy to work with you through that. In terms of actual review process, I guess I now have some questions for you all. We've typically done things alphabetically, just to keep things consistent and, to help with maybe that non-comparison. But there is, a unique line that's being drawn in all these applications of planning grants versus operational grants. So a potential area that we could, or not an area, but I guess tactic that we could take is grouping those planning grants together with operational. If that might be something you're interested in, then we could do alphabetical within each of those sectors. I also wanted to ask if there's anything in particular you would like staff to flag for your review at this August 1st in-person meeting. So as you begin to think about those questions, I kind of wanted to give you some examples of like August 1st, we're all in person, and like application summary slides. So having reviewed the applications, being experts in your respective areas of employment and life experience, you're coming to this in-person meeting ready to talk deflection programs. And then I have some slides to share with you all that are application summary slides that hopefully, walk us through discussion and deliberation, but are not overly detailed since you guys have done the work. We will not be going through, for instance, line item by line item on each budget. Even with an all-day in-person meeting, there's simply not enough time for that. But here are some things that I propose presenting to you all on that August 1st date. The county or counties represented, their total budget request, whether they're a planning or operational grant, their estimated operational date, their program type or model as CJC has classified it. Again, we did not ask grantees to put themselves in a box, but rather answer narrative questions that then we will analyze and help identify what model or models they might be following. And then like a high level overview, what that could look like for Hava County, for instance, is that, 150,000 as the floor for her total request. So she maybe was not an early adopter, but is coming in for her funding now. She wants a planning grant. She estimates her operational date to be January of 2025. Her program type is a mobile crisis team. Her high-level overviews, displayed here, but kind of like just a couple of sentences of, in response to a call for service, team comprising of community-based behavioral health professionals and/or other credible messengers, sometimes in partnership with medical professionals, engage an individual to de-escalate crises, mediate low-level conflicts, address quality of life issues by providing referrals, treatment services, or case managers. And then an example of a consortium, which are my cats, Rigatoni and Ziti counties, applying as a consortium, combining their floors of 150 for a total of 300,000. They're ready for operational grant. They're ready to roll September of this year when recriminalization comes into play. They're following a lead model. Their high-level overview is, as a preventative measure during routine activities such as patrol or response to a service call, first responder engages individuals and provides referrals or treatment or to a case manager. If law enforcement is the first responder, no charges are filed, no arrests are made. That's one type of lead model. So something to that effect, but I'm going to go ahead and go back a couple of slides here for you all to kind of let me know what you think. Alicia, I saw your hand up first.
Yeah, no, thanks, Casey. I'm remembering back to 2020 and those high level summaries that you had, those slides were really helpful. And I mean, I think the other thing that we added, which was helpful, and I can't remember because I think we went through a couple revisions just of those, but and I don't know maybe if that's not applicable for this, but the FTE that's proposed is always just helpful to just have that out there somewhere really easily accessible. And then what are the outcomes that they anticipate they're going to achieve, like this number of individuals served, deflecting from, I know you had it on there, but actually the number, if you have this many FTE, the outcome is we think we're going to be able to deflect this many people or something, if that's indicated at all in there. My other question is, are we going to be, and I might have missed this when you were talking, but are we using the same database? We got rid of that, right? The one that we used.
Yeah,
So
it is in existence, but yeah, there will be no SurveyMonkey apply database that you all need to log into.
And just fill out. Okay.
Yeah, so nothing on that end. It was just an extra burden for you all, I think. So Google Drive links, you'll have the entire application. Feel free to review or print or mark up as you see necessary, and then come August 1st with your comments ready for discussion. Okay, and yeah, I mean, I may just offer, because I remember sitting in my office for, I think, 5 hours on the Zoom call. I had everything, I mean, it was spread out as I was going through all of those applications. So if there's plenty of room in that area for us to do a little bit of that, if it's that many applications. But yeah, no, that sounds great. The actual venue for this August 1st meeting is still being determined, but basically we have staff right now that are touring other state agency, conference rooms, auditoriums, etc. The Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, where we've had previous in-person meetings, is unavailable, unfortunately. So we are looking somewhere with ample space, and we'll keep that in mind. And then in response to your earlier comment about the high-level summary, I love the idea of us kind of including a high-level budget summary as well, of kind of like, hey, here's the gist of their budget. It's going to these personnel. We're not going to give you the exact job descriptions that are outlined in the budget line item that you all can reference and have maybe referenced, but we are definitely happy to include of Hey, notable, they wanted to purchase a vehicle, or like, hey, notable, they are doing capital construction in this way. Like some of those big budget highlights, happy to include.
Thank you, Katie. Appreciate it.
Rep Conrad, I think you are up next.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I appreciate that. So I guess, from the staff side of it, some of the things that I think would be helpful in terms of information as you do the summary slides and as you have conversations with counties to get information from them, is there going to be any braided funding? Are they using any other grants or any other sources of funding? Particularly, I'm looking at that back end once we get to measuring outcomes, is to know if somebody isn't meeting outcomes, is it because some of the funding is at risk, some of those kind of things. The other side of that is, are these going to be brand new positions, or are they going to use existing resources? Because again, it gets to that outcomes and that delay side of things for how soon can we actually see some of the results, and setting expectations up front.
That sounds great. Thank you. So I guess to thinking about those and consider of how to prepare you guys for that August 1st, I think that, so those particular questions, unfortunately, were not listed as part of the application. And, really just thinking about the grantee burden of getting that in time for July 1st, since this was also a quick turnaround. But asking about sustainability of funding, braided funding structures, other funding sources. I love the idea of the new positions versus, are you using existing resources? We have plans to ask those questions as part of quarterly reporting, which is coming in the future. And so I guess I would maybe reply with a question of, would that be acceptable that as part of quarterly reporting that would happen, I believe, so October 1st through 25th. After the 25th, it's due, and then we have kind of an update for you all on those sustainability questions, existing resources, et cetera. And I guess the reason that, these weren't included as part of the application budget worksheet, et cetera, was just because those questions weren't applicable to eligibility requirements for formula funding. The formula funding's, going out if an applicant's eligible, but not only, you, Rep. Conrad, but also the CJC and, governor's office, other interested parties have noted how helpful those sustainability questions would be in the future once programs have received their money and are starting to go. So would that be acceptable to come back to that in quarterly reporting?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Before we move on to the next question too, I wanted to circle back. Alicia, you had noted something about the number of participants, and staff were able to look into that while we moved on to Rep. Conrad's questions. So the only question that we have in the application right now that could get at that would be what qualifies as a successful outcome in your deflection program. But we did not ask any particular questions about estimated number of participants, solely because we knew that many programs would be in such an early planning phase that they might not know. Of course, we'll highlight it on summary slides if it was included, but I propose that be another thing that we follow up on at quarterly reporting, from here on out. And then also to keep the GRC informed once we begin to have data collection and tracking submitted by grantees. That's something that we can keep you apprised of live, on how these folks are deflecting. So I apologize, and I also hope that is okay.
No, that sounds great. And I know you all do such a great job with your annual review that somehow I'm sure it'll be incorporated in that. So thanks, Casey.
Sam, I saw your hand up next.
Thanks, Casey. The only comment that I have, appreciating the timeline of all of it and how many other grants are happening simultaneously. In terms of the braided funding, which I know can be critical to, a full program, my only piece about being more curious about that up front is how it relates to data collection and reporting, right? So, you know, if it's braided funding, because for some of these folks, if the burns are eligible, right, that's 110 funding plus the deflection funding. That might be great programmatically, but I think just understanding how the reporting is structured and what the data collection would look like and the outcomes that we're looking at, that would potentially impact how we're understanding that based on the rated funding. So that's just a comment and maybe a smaller group to think through that.
Yeah, I guess just to clarify my understanding, were you thinking that, maybe a grantee having braided funding would affect their ability to collect data and report?
No, I think it's just whether or not the data we're collecting is linked to just how you distinguish what funding stream and program actually impacted the data is where the braided funding gets tricky, right? So was it the build out of treatment programs? Was it the law enforcement, the build out of the supportive coordinated efforts of law enforcement? I just think as we get to think through that, how the money is being allotted will potentially determine what impacted the success or, areas that we need to work on deflection.
Yeah, okay. I think I get that now. That reminds me that Paul Solomon, sorry to call you out, but we had a conversation a while back when I was bringing Paul on board to the GRC and all the functions of deflection, of how a flag like that, especially of what the majority of funding is going towards, or maybe a percentage of funding, might be helpful in these application summary slides. So I just wanted to bring that up. Paul, you're welcome to comment or keep silent, but we're happy to do that as staff too, just to give you all kind of an idea of, okay, well, hey, the majority of funding is going to, a behavioral health workforce views here. That's probably a great flag for Sam and team at OHA. Because while the CJC doesn't have the ability to follow up on other OHA funding sources of burns, et cetera, maybe that's something we can collaborate on to kind of get a bigger picture of, hey, the folks that are really going on this behavioral health, funding plan, how does that work with the existing funding streams from OHA? That might be something worth looking into. And then, maybe we want to know the percentage of funds going to law enforcement or percentage of funds going to construction, and having analyzed those, we can then kind of say, hey, BHG grants overall are X percentage going here, X percentage going here, in kind of like very high level bucket topics.
Yeah, and please not to overcomplicate it all, but I think it will, because we're learning, it'll be interesting to see the levers of funding, like what has the most impact on the success of the program. And I think that's where the braiding will be interesting to look at. So nothing to do, right this second, but just wanted to put it out there as the evaluation team is getting up and running.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate your comments, and yeah, definitely can keep an eye out on that as the programs stand up and we continue to check in. I know, flagging is another thing to look into for future us. We did have a question specifically on the deflection program coordinator, excuse me, of how that position was being funded, like if it was BHD funds specifically or from elsewhere. That is included, I believe, in the deflection program coordinator section of applicant eligibility. But that might be worth noting as you all complete your reviews. GRC members, is there anything else as staff that we can do, on August 1st or before August 1st to help prepare you for this review, or any other guidance that you need regarding this review, expectations, etc.? Okay. In that case, let's pause for public comment. So at this time, I invite members of the public who wish to comment to do so. Please feel free to reuse that raise hand feature on Teams, or alternatively, unmute if you're joining us via the teleconference function of Teams. We'll try to limit public comment to like maybe a couple minutes per person, just because we are ending or wrapping up at the 11 a.m. mark. But if anyone is interested in doing so, they may do so now. Okay, I'm not seeing or hearing anything, but I also know that I'm especially sensitive to silence. So, I will guess maybe give it another 10 seconds or so in case you're fumbling with the mute button. Okay. Well, then I have a few next steps identified. Basically, for applicants or grantees tuning in, as a reminder, standard BHD application closes July 1st, 1 p.m. So please get those in and let Avery and I know if you have any questions in the meantime. That tribal consultation process is forthcoming. We will have further updates for you all, likely at that August 1st meeting of what that process might look like, what we learned from consultation. And yeah, we're excited to hear the needs of tribes and where that is going. Application materials will be shared with Impact's GRC members no later than July 15th. So keep an eye out on your inboxes early mid-July for an email with that Google Drive link and the respective instructions and resources. And if you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out to me directly. And then we have an in-person GRC meeting on August 1st to review applications and make award decisions for the Behavioral Health Deflection Grant Program as part of the standard application. That venue, as noted, is still being determined. CJC is working hard to tour available facilities, and as soon as that gets nailed down, it'll be added to the meeting invite, as well as distributed to GRC members of where exactly that will be. It will be in Salem at a minimum, so you can count on that. But yes, Stacy Rubaker.
Do you actually have the times of August 1st, like what time we're starting, how long we'll be there? Because I
Yeah.
put that in
No,
there.
great question. That we do have. So 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., I believe, with lunch provided for GRC members. It'll be a working lunch because we'll be, going through applications, but 9 a.m. start time and pretty much an all-day meeting.
Great, thank you.
Quorum is definitely required to take action on those things. If you are a GRC member, that was the primo date that we selected that the most folks could attend. If your plans change, please reach out to us directly and let us know. That would be greatly appreciated to be kept apprised of your attendance to that meeting. If you selected that you were available that time in the doodle poll that Avery sent out a couple weeks ago, we're counting on you to be there to achieve quorum. All right. Are there any questions for me at this time? thank you for letting me talk at you for 2 hours. I so appreciate you all showing up, and if anything comes to mind, questions, concerns, let me know via email in the next month. Otherwise, I hope you all have a wonderful 4th of July holiday, and I will see you in person on August 1st.
Thank you so much for all your good work.
Yes, thank you
Thanks,
very
Casey.
much.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
All right, be well.